Episode: St. Lucia Caribbean Tourist Excursions and the Piton Mugging. As before, we wore our island tourist clothing, and of course, we also brought numerous changes of clothing to accommodate each excursion's potentially unique needs or requirements. Well, we checked out the airport's decrepit delivery van for our plan. And, well, we decided we definitely would borrow it. It would become our incognito transport vehicle. Taylor noted, "I like this van. The more native and run down we are, the more invisible we are. We should be van invisible in this old bucket of bolts." Taylor gave a thumbs up to everyone, and then she gave a salute. Katie joined in and said, "The van has character, and well, it will hide us. I like that. And it's gonna get us where we need to go, totally invisible. That's great." Well, we all just piled into the airport delivery van, and we drove off into the distance, into the island's interior, where we would enjoy the fun of St. Lucia's touristy activities, just like any other ordinary tourist. And yeah, we went on all sorts of excursions all over the place over the next few days. We went on a picturesque all-terrain vehicle ATV tour. We drove through lush, green, plant-abundant areas. We had the opportunity to drive on a beach that was called the $5 beach, where we had lunch, and where we could drive on the beach in our ATVs, or where we could just wander and explore in the immediate area. We rode through city streets afterwards, and we drove through low-income, real-world, hard-life residential areas, which were in great contrast to other areas that we drove around, where we saw expensive, wealthy neighborhoods and estates. There seemed to be quite a vast disparity in wealth and lifestyle between the different residents of St. Lucia. At one point on our ATV excursion, in a remote and rural sandy dune heavy area, we saw remarkably a rocket booster on its beach. Yeah, we saw a dilapidated, discarded, old, huge rocket booster that NASA apparently had let just fall into the Caribbean, and that eventually, by sheer fluke, drifted and landed ashore here on the island of St. Lucia, apparently now being used as a remote tourist sightseeing attraction. You know, I suppose NASA's trash, discarded rocket booster had become a prized tourist attraction in St. Lucia. Now that is recycling. Well, continuing on our ATV drive, during our return, at the end of our excursion, we drove alongside a more main primary road, presumably for a faster and more efficient return, now that the excursion was over. So on that return drive, we approached and passed under several huge billboard signs. They were also on the side of the road and on the main road, where we drove under one after another. The billboards, they depicted men that wielded scary, very clearly lethal shotguns. The billboard signs also provided more details that declared, "For personal protection, call Sterling Services, bodyguards." It seemed so weird for us to be on a tourist vacation excursion and to see huge advertisement billboards for armed guards on demand for protection services. It made me wonder, what happens on this island that needs that kind of protection? Well, regardless of why anyone would need armed protection on our tourist vacation destination island, we just carried on with our time off, vacation, and adventure. Next up, we decided to expand on the idea of roaming into the rural and less tourist-traveled remote areas of St. Lucia, like we did on our ATV tour. We went on long, island-spanning dune buggy tours this time. It took us even farther away from civilization. We drove so far into the wilds of St. Lucia that there were very, very few tourists. And then it seemed there were no tourists anywhere present at all. We were very much alone with our tour guides. Finally, we were on the beach, where Tiny was able to drive his dune buggy. He went wild, driving in donuts. He spun his car in circles as he did. He drove fast, and he jumped off beach dunes in excitement. He pulled off all sorts of stunts, like turning hard, throwing the car into a sliding drift sideways, and wild things like insanely driving even on two wheels. He even spun around in a 180-degree reversal in an on-the-spot, spin-on-a-dime rotation in a driving move that is known as the bootlegger's reverse. Tiny was a professional pro driver, even in a dune buggy for recreation. Taylor, she was a monster on the beach, testing her extreme driving skills on the beach and its dunes. Driving her dune buggy insanely, totally crazy dune driving everywhere. Katie and Bob, they seemed to shed their safety-minded conservative demeanors as they sped with thrill all over in their respective dune buggies of excitement. Katie seemed nervous though, but was having a good time. She zipped around on the beach and occasionally drove up the side of a dune in thrill. Bob tried hard to race his dune buggy and jump off as many beach sand dunes as he could before the tour guides called us back to move on. Ever the guardian, I drove in the rear of the pack as I watched everyone for their safety and for their enjoyment, of course. Having left the beach, we saw the real squalid lifestyle led by the normal native residents of St. Lucia, as opposed to the wealthy outsiders coming to St. Lucia and buying up all the land and real estate and building their own, now closed off, private estates and mansions. Well, back to more positive things on another day. We went on a snorkeling excursion. The excursion began with everyone riding in a big, very large tourist boat. There were several stop waypoints on our journey around the island. We were able to see coral reefs. We saw reefs, human damaged and disturbed public coral reefs, as opposed to also seeing the pristine, protected, beautiful, private coral reefs, of which the contrast between the two was severely undeniable, considering the damage that we saw from human public reefs versus the beautiful natural coral reefs. Human damage was bad. Well, we also saw lots of water wildlife, like abundant schools of fish. We saw a huge, big sea turtle at one point that startled Katie and seemingly charged at her, swimming straight towards her like a torpedo locked on its target. It turned out, though, the turtle just swam right on by Katie. It had no reason or care about her after all. Katie also saw manta rays, several of them. She saw sand sharks here and there as well. Shockingly, some so-called unthreatening sand sharks were very big, almost 5 to 6 feet in length. Scarily, we even saw a 12-foot long, huge bull shark, which resulted in the tour guides panicking, albeit a controlled panic, to get everyone out of the water pronto, as apparently bull sharks can be aggressive and deadly. Well, we got out of that water, and fast. Well, after sailing on to a new location, we went to snorkel around a shipwreck, where we saw even more wildlife. We also saw maybe a little bit more worrisome and dangerous wildlife down at the shipwreck. Near that shipwreck, we encountered a barracuda. With its razor teeth and lightning speed, it threatened serious injury to anyone daringly stupid enough to approach it, or even come nearby it. Well, obviously we stayed very clear, giving it plenty of distance. The Barracuda needed its personal space, and we gave it to it. As our snorkeling tour ended, its finale was a little unfortunate. Everyone went into the water for a farewell, final snorkeling dip. Unfortunately, only to find jellyfish everywhere. Bloomed jellyfish were everywhere. There were hundreds, if not thousands, of jellyfish in the water. It was a landmine field in the water. And if the jellyfish ruining the final snorkeling swim wasn't bad enough, a sudden surprise tropical rainstorm appeared out of nowhere, and it dumped excessive amounts of water down onto us and all over the boat. I could only wonder if the jellyfish bloom was somehow triggered by the insane rainstorm, or if it was just some amazing random coincidence, or maybe it was something to do with the time of year. It was just crazy that all that happened all at once. On another day, we went on another excursion, but this time over the water. This time, we went to a busy, very crowded marina mooring area, in an area that is known as Rodney Bay. We went on a parasailing excursion tour. I watched as we did so in fear and immense anxiety, as Katie, Taylor, and Bob, and even Tiny, all went up into the sky in the air, parasailing on parachutes. Where they were up in the air, being pulled by ropes that were then sent down to power boats that dragged them around as they floated up into the air without any control themselves. Of course, having fun. Again, being helpless. To me, being dragged around with zero control felt unnecessarily extremely dangerous. But, oh well, I had to celebrate their free spirits and their free will. It was all there on full display. Well, regardless of their decision to fly with sails, the bottom line for me was that I did not intend to put my life on the line in the name of alleged fun. So instead, I returned to and stayed on the beach, where I watched everyone else put their lives in the hands of total, potentially untrained strangers. So again, to be clear, I cannot stress enough. It seemed to me utterly crazy to put your life, your existence, in the hands of complete and total strangers, and somehow suspending all sanity and sense of risk just because you're on vacation. It makes it all okay. Clearly the team did not share my perspective as they embraced their razor's edge thrill rides up in the sky. Their experiences, in my opinion, were wild and insane. Tiny was flying free as he parasailed in the sky. He seemed to genuinely be free of his woes as he floated and he flew free in the sky like an angel in heaven. The parasailing experience seemed perfect and so good for Tiny. And Taylor, as she parasailed way up there in the sky, she laughed and parasailed high and mighty. She loved flying free, high, so scarily high up in the air. But she was alive with adventure and thrill and adrenaline. Accepting, if not diving headfirst into the danger that was feared by everyone else, made Taylor feel alive. And there was Bob, who ended his parasailing activity a little early. Although Bob overall had a good time, it was apparent that his anxiety seemed to have very much exceeded his exhilaration. The payoff, or the return on investment, ROI, was not there for Bob. Fear had both amplified and muted his fun as a parasailing adventuring tourist who was at the mercy of dubious powerboat drivers in a very busy and crowded marina. Katie was having a really good time flying up in her parasail until she suddenly gripped onto her parachute ropes as she suddenly looked terrified, scared. She screamed from way up high. Katie was drifting. She was being pulled towards a nearby boat mast. She was on a collision course to smash full on into that boat's tall spire of a mast. The towing powerboat was adjusting course, trying to pull Katie away from her forthcoming rope entangling, splatting doom. But despite their efforts, it looked like Katie was going to crash into that mast. Completely helpless, I just watched Katie rapidly approach her apparent fate. Somehow, by miracle, the pulling powerboat did manage to turn, and it forcibly yanked Katie away from the threatening, impending boat mast splat. With that experience of Katie maybe being killed on a simple excursion, just in a blink of an eye, well, we decided we should probably stop and only do things that we directly controlled ourselves. And so, on another day, albeit on land now, we went on another excursion. We took a Segway tour. We were totally ignorant about Segways. Well, except for Tiny and Taylor, it turned out, who were apparently Segway experts, no less. And there were rules. For our excursion, in order to proceed, we all had to prove that we were capable on Segways. We had to prove our Segway skills by driving on and finishing successfully a Segway obstacle and test trail course. Once again, Taylor showed off her expert skills, this time on her Segway. She zipped and raced around on her Segway, making it look entirely natural and easy. Taylor was very good at driving Segways, as she proved. Once again, she proved to be an expert in yet seemingly everything that no one would ever have expected she had ever even done, much less be an expert. Well, Tiny too dashed and zoomed about on his Segway. It was obvious that Tiny had an extensive veteran experience driving Segways. He was a master Segway driver. Katie was surprisingly adept at driving her Segway as well. She adapted to it quickly and naturally. You would have thought that Katie had driven Segways before, but apparently she never had. Well, although I wobbled a bit myself at first on the Segway, I did get better. I followed my usual systematic, methodical learning process. And so I made sure to study the Segway and to understand every component and control before doing anything. And then I tested each and every control to confirm that I owned, that I mastered it, I understood it. I could use it in an emergency quickly. With my readiness, preparation, and limited practice, I pretty quickly I felt competent at driving my Segway. Bob tried hard to drive his Segway, but it proved very challenging for Bob. The Segway seemed to be a wild beast or a bucking bronco that Bob had to cling to and hang on to for fear of just falling off and injuring himself. Eventually, Bob just barely got the hang of it. Having established our Segway basic skills, having proven ourselves, we headed out into the wilderness on our Segways. We drove on dirt roads, and we drove on both small and large trails. We ended up driving through some very wild areas of wilderness with dense foliage and banana trees everywhere. Our Segway trek ultimately took us all the way into the wilds, the deep, foliage-dense areas of St. Lucia, far, far away from civilization. It took us all the way to St. Lucia's magnificent Pitons, which were two lush, petite, mini-tall, narrow mountains. The guides explained the Pitons were almost 2,500 feet tall, and they were actually tiny plugged volcanic spires that had formed long ago by volcanoes and had since overgrown with trees and foliage. Well, we rode on to a clearing that overlooked a bay and those very Pitons. The lead tour guide, named Titus, explained again, I think for our excitement, how the Pitons are plugs to currently dormant volcanoes, but they will erupt and blow if the volcano should ever become active again someday. Titus told us of an old war bunker that was right here next to us by the clearing, but he said we should not go inside because it is dangerous. He said there are no lights, it is pitch black inside, and he cautioned there are trash piles and sharp debris all over inside within the darkness. So everyone needs to stay clear of the bunker. Just stay away and stay out. Titus turned and asked his partner assistant guides to join him and hand out snacks and drinks. Once everyone had their snacks in hand, the guides withdrew, and they kept to themselves, away from the tour group, seemingly giving us our own space, giving us time for our own break, our personal time, so that we could eat and rest a bit. Well, we, the G team, all hung out together in the clearing, in view of the majestic Pitons, and we rested near the foliage under the shade of trees, of banana trees. Suddenly, the crunch of leaves and dirt and road debris crackled and snapped nearby in the foliage in the forest of banana trees. Two electric Jeep-like vehicles, they sped into the clearing from nowhere. They made virtually no sound, though, at all, using only electric motors, and not having ordinary island common combustion audible loud engines that we would have heard. I looked to the team and I cautioned, "Hold tight, let's see what this is all about." Taylor moved her hand to her waist into position to draw her concealed pistol that was hidden holstered inside the interior of her shorts. Adding to the surprise, 4 men stepped out from the old war bunker's dark shadows and from the foliage that surrounded the clearing. And all 4 of those men brandished shotguns. One of them, their apparent leader, he threatened, "Hey, hand over your money, jewelry, and valuables, and no one gets hurt or killed. Anyone tries to be a hero, you all die. We won't hesitate to kill every single one of you. If any of you does something stupid, you die." Katie looked straight at the man, and then she looked at each of us, and she solemnly but very clearly informed us, "He is telling the truth. My truth bearer tattoo, it's not tingling or burning or doing anything at all. He's not deceiving us. They will kill us, without any doubt or any question. They'll just do it. They almost seem like, I think they would actually prefer to kill us than leave us alive." Katie yelped, "They would like us to make a move, I think, which somehow would justify their killing us." One of the muggers, the apparent leader, he warned us, "You should listen to the woman. We will kill you, no doubts, no worries." Things got even worse. 2 more men stepped out of the E-Jeeps, and each of them, they wielded assault rifles. One of them barked out loud, "Get their stuff! Let's get this thing going. Let's get out of here. Taylor looked tempted to make a move despite Katie's warning. Taylor was clearly scanning and assessing potential attack vectors to counter our assailants. But it was evident that there was no way that Taylor could overcome net 8 armed guards at point-blank range. Never mind if the tour guides themselves were also secretly in on the ambush on the caper. What if they joined in? Yeah, even Taylor had to acknowledge that we were defeated before the fight even started. Our assailants, they had the jump on us, and there was nothing that we could do about it. Taylor nodded in resignation that we were beat and that we had been mugged. She sighed and she said, "Okay, take our stuff. Go ahead." Bob just shook his head and accepted our fate as well. And Tiny, he looked to the ground and then up to the sky, and he simply spoke, "Dis wrong." The gang of muggers, clearly not caring if what they were doing was wrong or not, they just took our Knights Templar KT tote bag that had our hand grenades, explosives, guns, pills, sprays, money, and all sorts of stuff inside it. And then the thugs even took our KT comms watches right off our wrists. And of course, they took our jewelry and money that we had on hand. The muggers, however, seemed a bit rushed, so they hastily grabbed our things, and from any other tourists, and they didn't even open our KT tote bag, with one of them just carrying it off and throwing it inside one of the E-Jeeps. Thankfully, in their haste, they also did not frisk or search any of us, and so they didn't find Taylor's conceal-carried tiny XDS-45 caliber pistol that she had in her holster inside her shorts. Having collected hastily, though, their booty from mugging us, the shotgun-wielding thieves all retreated to the E-Jeeps, and they drove away, out of sight. Bob exclaimed, "What the heck? We go on a random Segway tour, and we get mugged? How common is this? Or are we just that unlucky? Being on your hell difficulty, life setting for challenges and troubles, such that we must get mugged even on a tourist excursion. I swear, hell difficulty never, it never relents. Hell difficulty doesn't stop." Katie began to tear up and cry, "We can't even have a few days of having a normal life? We aren't allowed to enjoy things or have any fun? Why does even this short time off have to end up in danger and drama and life-threatening things? What are we gonna do now?" Katie cried. Taylor declared, "We will hunt them down, and we will get our stuff back, and we will exact justice so they will never do such evil again to anyone else." Well, serious as that was, I nodded in agreement and spoke. "Yes, we will hunt them down with a vengeance. We need to get our gear back. And like Taylor said, it is our duty to fight against evil and to defeat it, so it cannot harm anyone else at all. We are the G Team. It is our calling to protect and to save humanity in all things, big and small. And this happening to us, it's a sign that we should be involved here and help." Katie pondered aloud for us to hear her thoughts. It's entirely possible that our being mugged is, I guess, part of God's plan. Is it, I guess, not better to believe and have faith that this is part of God's plan, and to believe that this event will shape and guide us, all the while helping others avoid the same fate, if not worse? Katie formally externalized her inner thoughts, and she declared, "I personally believe firmly that our being here at this time to be mugged is not a coincidence. I am confident that we were where we were supposed to be so that we would be mugged and caught off guard for a purpose, all per God's plan." Bob just looked at Katie and he said, "Hooah," in agreement. Bob suddenly paused and marveled aloud. "You know, it seems oddly clever for those muggers to use electric vehicles so they can just sneak up and drive silently without the traditional noises of, combustion fossil fuel engines rumbling and revving and making all their sounds. And, wow, they could even charge those vehicles covertly. They don't even need to go to a gas station or anything. That would mean they have low to no dependence on external fuels or power sources, especially if they have solar generators. They could operate completely undetected off the grid." Bob added, "And they don't even have to worry much about battery range because, well, we're on a finite, pretty small sized island. So I bet they can just drive around the island on a single charge." Bob concluded, "Even more surprisingly to me, they're pretty dang smart. And they're clearly well-resourced for just being thug muggers. I don't know. Seems a little fishy to me." In the meantime, the tour guides were avoiding eye contact with all of us. They kept talking and yelling, bad luck, too bad, nothing to do. It seemed to me they were actively discouraging anyone from calling the police or involving law enforcement of any kind. They were evidently trying to declare that the incident happened and it was over, that we were done, what happened, and that everyone should now just go home because there was nothing to be done. The excursion and the mugging were over. Bluntly, the tour guides were utterly useless. They were either deliberately silent, hoping that we would just accept our fate and leave, and not involve the police, all just to make their lives that much easier by not having to deal with law enforcement, and I suppose their questions. Or perhaps the tour guides were accomplices, secretly working with the muggers, where they just bring innocent tourists to the planned and designated ambush site, and they feign and pretend and act as if they themselves were also victims. And then they discourage any and everyone from involving the police. It was evident that no effort could get the tour guides to say anything but their broken record message of, "It happened, let it go home." With little recourse, I concluded, well, this I think ends our vacation. Let's return to the plane, get new gear, and then let's go into town, see what clues we might find about this set of muggers. Let's go to a seedy bar or something, where scumbag thug muggers might hang out themselves. And let's see if we can lure them out. If we can set a lure, maybe we can offer to buy back our comms watches, no questions asked. And maybe our lure will get us lucky, and somebody will know who the thugs were that actually did the mugging of us. And once we know who they are, we will pay them to return our gear back. In many pounds of their flesh, as the saying goes. And of course, we will get our stuff back in the process of our payback for their mugging of us. Katie said, a little nervously, "Hoo-ah!" Bob joined in and simply said, "Heard, understood, and acknowledged. Hoo-ah!" Taylor gestured approval and said, "Hoo-ah!" I nodded and shared in the chorus of agreement, "Hoo-ah!" Well, unlikely as it was, our island vacation turned into a mission for God. Our vacation became a mission quest for the G Team.